I love dragon fruit, so much so that I've spent 2 years of my life cultivating these 6 plants to get some of these delicious fruit. So in this video, I'm gonna give you everything you need to know to go from knowing nothing about dragon fruit to harvesting your very first fruit. But to do that, I need some help from a god.
Your dragon fruit journey begins today.
I've done a ton of dragon fruit videos on this channel, but the secret behind all of them is Richard Lee of grafting dragon fruit. I call him the dragon fruit god. We did a tour of your place a couple years ago, Rich.
We did.
Everyone loved that. So I figured, why not have you back to bestow upon us the wisdom of your dragon fruit journey, which he's at the level where he's grown his own varieties of dragon fruit, let alone grown them successfully. So why don't we just start with what this plant actually is, because it looks really scary.
All right, let's get into what dragon fruit is. So dragon fruit is a subtropical cactus. They grow very well and it may look very intimidating. They're spiky. It just looks like a plant that you won't even come close to, but guess what? They're easier to grow than you think. And Kevin, you tried growing dragon fruit. How was that experience with you?
Surprisingly easy. In fact, that's how we first met. Is I was growing my first dragon fruit. It was called a Vietnam White at my old house, and the god slid into my DMs. He said, hey, did you try this out? Did you try this out? And you helped me kind of get to my first flower and get to my first fruit. So we're gonna pay that forward and help you guys get there, starting out with all these different varieties. It's a little confusing when you go to like maybe a big box store, you'll see them sold as red or white, and that's kind of not really the truth of dragon fruit. So why don't we start with like a couple varieties to start with?
Yeah, so some varieties that are staple in my garden, once I started my collection and I put Kevin on, I was like, you haven't heard of sugar dragon and you need sugar dragon, because it's one of those varieties where they're self-fertile, but they're not self-pollinating. So you're gonna have to hand manually pollinate it with its pollen, but the rewards you get from it is a super, super delicious dragon fruit that you probably won't ever find in the store. And the only way to taste them is growing them yourself.
Why I find this such a fascinating plant to grow is it's a fruit that when you harvest it, it stops ripening.
Yep.
So to get it to a grocery store, you de facto are harvesting it before it's ripe. And that's why everyone says, oh, like it tastes like a bland kiwi. I'm like, bro, you have not even tasted the fruits of my garden. But the two things, to me at least, that seem the most important to learn is it a self-fertile variety and is it a self-pollinating variety? And those kind of sound the same. So why don't we explain the difference between those two, because it'll make or break your growing journey.
Correct. We call them self-fertile or self-sterile. One can fruit on their own, and one you're going to need to cross-pollinate with a different variety of dragon fruit. And if you want to go a little further, there's even dragon fruit that can produce pollen and pollinate itself. And we call that the self-fertile, self-pollinating varieties. But to keep it kind of simple,
yeah,
self-fertile, self-sterile, and you just gotta work a little bit harder for the self-sterile ones. You had some experience with the self-sterile ones.
It's not actually that bad, but I would say it's a bit more advanced. And so a variety I might recommend, you mentioned sugar dragon. There's also Vietnam White, which is kind of like everyone's beginner dragon fruit. But if we walk over here, Rich, we want to be taking a cutting and not growing from a seed, right?
That's correct. So if you guys have the option to get cuttings, I always highly recommend you guys get cuttings instead of seeds. With cuttings, you're getting the exact fruit that you're tasting from the plant. If you're growing from a seed, you won't know if it's gonna taste like that seed, that fruit that you tried. And there's so many aspects that can go that will change the fruit. It can get a little bit more of the mothers or the fall, whatever cross-pollinated with, it can change the flavors. But when you're taking an actual cutting, this is sugar dragon, and we just took a cutting from the sugar dragon plant. So this does not change at all. It stays sugar dragon. This will grow into a mother tree just like this one, and you'll get the exact fruits from the sugar dragon.
So if you think about this from a vegetable gardener's perspective, is how I often relate to things.
Yeah.
This would be no different than taking a cutting of Genovese basil,
yeah,
and rooting that in water, and then you have the exact same variety of Genovese basil. The genetics are the exact same, versus if you start from seed, not only is it way, way slower, right, like you're talking 5 years to get to a fruit from seed, maybe a year. You can get a little faster than a year, probably.
It depends when you grow them. If you start earlier in the wintertime, it has fully developed roots. By summertime, you could get fruits. If you're starting mid of the season, then it's just gonna have a lot of growth, but very next season, you're gonna have fruits for sure.
Okay, so we're gonna show you how to take your very first cutting, or if you have a cutting from a friend or you've purchased one, we'll show you how to pot it up and get it some roots. So to start your journey, what you're gonna need is some sort of pot. Any kind of soil is fine, right?
soil that drains well. You don't want it to have too much moisture in there, because if there's too much moisture, the root rot can actually start even when it doesn't have roots.
Okay.
And we'll explain that in a little bit, because we're gonna need to plant it in a certain depth.
Yeah. And then we need a bamboo stake because it doesn't have roots. It doesn't have a way to stand itself up.
Correct.
And some tape. You could use pretty much anything here.
Yeah, garden tape, masking tape, anything to hold it up.
And a pen for kind of like my favorite part, which is graffitiing the dragon fruit. So how do I know what kind of cutting I'm supposed to be taking? Just say this plant right here.
Okay, so here, what I look for is a nice stem here that has a good one, making sure that the cutting is nice and plumped. And I want it to be at least over 7 to 8 inches, and this makes the cut. So here, I'm just gonna cut at the stem, and we call this stem cuts. Boom.
Boom.
And once you cut them, nice and dry, they don't need to rest out to callus. You can actually put this now right into the soil and get the rooting process started right away.
Yeah, and when I had taken my original Vietnam white at my old place and brought it down here, I kind of had to like deconstruct it because it was so big.
Yeah.
I chopped it into cuttings. I did a mixture of the stem cut and a flesh cut just based on what I had. Because some of these, some of these are really long, like 5 times longer than this.
Yeah,
and you kind of want to chop it up.
Right.
And you just need to let it dry for a little bit because it eventually kind of looks like that.
Yeah.
And then you just stick that in. So the next step is going to be popping it in, just like this, but there's a certain depth that matters, right?
You want to go about 1 inch, and you're just right perfect on that. You don't want to go too deep, because once it gets too much onto the flesh, the water actually gets on there. It sits for a while. If there's bacteria in there, they'll start eating at the flesh, contaminate it, and they'll start to rot.
The coolest part about dragon fruit, maybe I'll do it before you tape it, Rich.
Yeah.
Is
hold that for you.
This was a variety that we call red Laverne.
Yeah.
So you take a marker, we like these art line markers, and I don't know what it is, but this to me is just so satisfying. I'm writing right on it. Red Laverne, that's gonna stay forever.
Yeah.
So now I know, because trust me, when you take a lot of these cuttings, if you really start to get addicted to dragon fruit, you will lose track of what you've planted.
So easy.
Yeah, so you're just taping around.
Taping around, just making sure that it's nice and tight on our bamboo stick, because if anything accidentally hits it or the wind blows it, it's not gonna get knocked over. The bamboo stick will help it keep it right up, so that way the rooting process doesn't get disturbed.
So all we're doing now is we're gonna give this a touch of water, not too much.
Not too much.
And we're gonna put this in the shade. For 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks.
Until you see a new sprout coming out of these nodes here, or if you wiggle this and try to pull it out and it's hard to take out, then you know roots are in there.
Yeah.
Then they're ready.
Yeah, and we're in a 5-inch pot that we've got. So sometimes you can actually just look at the bottom. You'll see the roots coming out. You can look at the sides. You can see them coming out. But I like the tug test to see if I got root set.
Yeah.
And then you're right. What you have to understand about dragon fruit is both new stem chunks and flower buds will come out of these little points right here. These are growth nodes. And it'll start to transform. Like this thorn will kind of just fall off. And you'll see a tiny little bulb looking thing. And that's how you know it's actually starting to root. So we're going to fast forward through this part of the journey and show you what to do once you have a rooted cutting. But before we do that, let's clean up our gardening tools. I've been using 3-in-1 multi-purpose oil for like 5 or 6 years now to de-rust, lubricate, protect all my gardening tools. They're a sponsor of today's video. I think we've been working with them for like 6 years now. We love the stuff. And this is what I do. This is just my little technique because I have a tendency to leave my tools out sometimes. So you can either take a wire brush like this, put a little oil on and scrub it, which can work for really like kind of caked on rust, because this will actually penetrate rust. Or sometimes I like to use these little sort of rubber abrasive bricks, and I bring a little bit of scrubbing action on there to really get some shine back. And then the beauty of this is once you're actually done, and less forgetful than myself, you will be fully protected and that you don't have to do this too often after that. Tool care in general, to me, is something I kind of take a weird meditative enjoyment out of, because no matter what you do, sometimes you'll just forget them, you'll leave them out in the rain. And for me, I like scrubbing them clean, I like protecting them, but also when you're taking cuttings, especially of things that are a bit more disease prone, you wanna make sure that they're nice and sharp, they're sterilized, so you don't pass things on. I had a pretty bad case of garlic rust last year in my garden where I lost about 250 heads of garlic, and I suspect it could have been spread by improper tool use. So this process is not just an aesthetic one. We've actually got this pretty clean. I'm gonna do one more coat of 3-in-1 multi-purpose, but what I like to do at this point too is I bring a sharpening stone through and I get relatively gentle here, just a few passes up the cutting blade, and then just rub it in. So not only does it de-rust and lubricate and protect, but it'll actually keep this from rusting in the future. So 3-in-1 multi-purpose oil, sponsor of today's video. We love their stuff. Use it on your tools, and let's get back to learning how to master dragon fruit. I have a mallet now. Richard has 3 different types of dragon fruit he brought down. Actually, 2 of these you bred yourself.
Correct.
So I need to respect my mentor and my God by actually sacrificing this container because I don't have anywhere to put these. The roots might be crazy, but this is how you want to grow dragon fruit, up a trellis. So we're gonna rebuild it from scratch and show you how to do it. But first, it's time to smash. About right about there. Okay, here we go. I mean, it's all rooted up in here, yeah? It's pretty damn good. I was afraid, because this, look how brittle this is.
Oh, wow.
You know?
Yeah, that definitely.
I was afraid that was gonna crack in the first place, so it's a good thing we're doing this.
Right.
As we clear this one out, I'm actually gonna take cuttings. Money grows on trees. These are like 10 bucks each, right?
Literally.
Back to where it all began, dude. These 4 little cuttings that started this journey 3 years ago. So let's see what the root ball looks like, actually.
Let's go.
I'm actually very curious. Man, it's thick. It's weird how like fibrous they are.
Yeah.
It's very tough roots.
This is how your post is not completely falling down.
I know. It's the roots actually holding it in place.
The whole thing.
Yeah, but regardless, we're gonna show you guys a better way to build a trellis because this one lasted a couple years, and I think this past year it would have fallen.
Yeah.
There's too much growth.
Another wet season would have kind of eroded.
Yeah. So back in the day, you came up with this sort of pinwheel stabilizing trellis.
Yeah.
We think if you're gonna go in ground, which you don't have to, you can definitely do in containers like we just did. We think we came up with a cool method, so let's build that right now. Before we build this trellis for you, we have to address probably the most important question, Richard, which is, do I grow it in ground or in a container?
I recommend, if you are a beginner, to grow it in a container. This is just going to help you battle with weather. If you don't like the variety, you can always take it out and switch it out. And it just makes moving things a lot easier, especially if you're somewhere that snows or rains a lot, then you can move into the garage, keep them warm to survive the winter.
Yeah, and so if you are going to do a container, 20 gallons minimum, up to about 35, 40 gallons. Try to choose something wider than it is tall. I kind of made that mistake here with this more fragile terracotta that's quite tall, and as you can see, it likes to flake away. So it's not the most forgiving material, but we are going to show you how to build it in ground right now. While Richard's finishing the hole, I'm going to use this concrete pier and some cedar. Now, I probably would have liked something like maybe like redwood. I just didn't really find it at the store. So we're gonna just screw this in. This is gonna be our base from which the trellis is born.
Dragonfruit wants a fast draining soil, but a soil also relatively high in organic matter. Myself and Richard have both used Fox Farms Ocean Forest to good results. The important thing to remember is it is a subtropical or tropical cactus, so it doesn't want to be treated like a cactus that you might find in the desert with a true cactus mix.
So we have our basic trellis in place. This is gonna get really solid in a second. The problem is, you'll notice over here, we have this top frame. And that's because when a dragon fruit climbs, it wants to kind of shoot up. Your goal is you plant that cutting, shoot straight up, and then hopefully in that first year, it'll come down, kind of like hair falling over. And that's when it really wants to start triggering its flowering and its fruiting cycle. So to do that, we have to build a frame on top. The trellis is rebuilt. Now we actually get to put in some of Richard's cuttings and show you the next stage of growth. So Richard has bestowed upon me a rare variety. There's like none of these out there. This is called Connie Meyer. You're probably gonna start with something like we mentioned, Sugar Dragon, Vietnam White. Regardless, you'll have your rooted cuttings by now. Some of these are rooted, some of these are not, but we'll show you how to deal with it either way. So let's talk placement, Richard. You notice we have 4 cuttings. Why do we have 4 for one trellis?
Because there's 4 sides, and you're gonna wanna maximize all of these cuttings so that way you can get a lot of growth and a lot of fruits, right?
Yeah.
It's gonna suck if you only grow 1 cutting. It's gonna go to the very top, but you have all these other 3 sides. What are you gonna do? You add more cuttings.
Yeah. So you could, if you wanted to, grow different varieties around, or like we're gonna do, we're gonna grow the same variety and just maximize its growth. Yeah. Now let's talk about sun, because we have cuttings of different lengths, right? And my sun is gonna be coming from over here.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna put my biggest cutting in the most sun.
Right. The reason why we're doing that is because this cutting is bigger, so it can take more of that sun UV rays, and it's not going to dehydrate as quick as the smaller ones would. So we're going to find an area where we know it's not going to get as much sun, but still some diffuse sunlight. And we're going to put the smaller cuttings on that side.
And what we're trying to do when we put it in here is we're trying to go about inch or two deep max.
Yeah.
You don't want it to rot out down there. And then we also want it to be kind of close to this trellis and oriented so it's going kind of straight up. Correct. Because you're really trying to race to the top of the trellis, have it fall down and get that growth, right?
Yeah. And another thing to point out is dragon fruit got 3 sides. You're gonna have a side that's usually flat, which is this side, and then a side where they're gonna have the branch kind of stick out like that. We're gonna put the flat side against the post, and this is just gonna keep it upright as straight as possible. So once they do grow, it just climbs so much easier.
Yeah, so on this side, I can go here.
Yeah.
Or I could go like this. This just doesn't feel right.
Correct.
You know, back it right up against there.
So whenever it's the flushes to the post, then you're set.
Yeah.
We got some garden tape here.
Yep.
And we're just gonna tie this, and it's gonna stabilize them, and it helps them root a lot better because they know they are in soil now. And once you don't move them around or disturb their rooting process, they're gonna know it's time to start putting out roots, and they're gonna start coming out crazy out there.
We'll give these a very light water. They don't need much because there's not a whole lot of plant tissue here. And then, Richard, it's about fertilization. Because remember, again, the goal is to get it up there as quickly as possible. So how are we gonna do that?
So anything high in nitrogen right now, you're gonna wanna use an all-purpose, could be where you mix it with water, granular. Anything that is high in nitrogen, go ahead and add that, and it's just gonna help grow it faster. And you're gonna want that to happen because once it reaches the top and it's summertime, that's when all the fruit's gonna start popping up.
Yep. And you can get there within probably about 10 or 12 months if you're really racing to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're on it with the fertilizer routine and almost feed it every feeding with fertilizer, they can definitely take it. And if you draw a line, you will see growth grow actually every day once you start adding fertilizer. So
crazy.
Give that a try, guys. It's super exciting to see growth happen instantly, and it motivates you to go out there and keep on doing what you're doing.
By the way, if you did put in unrooted cuttings, you just want to protect them from the sun. So you could use your soil bag and kind of wrap this around for a little bit until they root, or you could use cardboard. You just want to protect them from the sun so they don't dry out. We're going to fast forward a few months and give you the tips you need to get your dragon fruit up to the top. So this is one called Tricia that's already gotten up to the top.
Yeah.
And what you'll notice, Richard, is we've got pretty much the original cuttings, which are down here, shooting straight up, which means we pruned off all the side shoots during its growth.
Right, and what Kevin means by that is if you're gonna have any side shoots that come out and it's not the main one that you're trying to reach the top, just take it off, guys. It's gonna fight for competition to grow, and it's actually gonna stagger your growth here. So any side growth that you see, cut them off, toss them to the side, and then let the main stalk grow to the top.
So once you do have them up at the top, now you have another job to do.
Yes, so you're gonna want to, what we call, crop the top. And once it passes a certain height on top of the trellis, you wanna cut the tip of it. So what that's gonna do is produce more shoots to go to the side instead of it growing straight to the top, right?
So take a look at this right here. That's exactly what we did right there. You cut the top, and the reason why, I think from a botanical level, is all the growth hormones here.
Yeah.
When you remove it, you force that plant to say, oh crap, like I don't know where I'm growing from, and it throws more shoots out, which is exactly what you want.
Correct.
So why don't we just do a demo?
All right, so you guys will see something like this. The main stalk is gonna get to about, here.
Maybe a foot above the top.
Foot above top, and I'll take about 2 inches like this. Just like that, guys.
And that's it.
Super easy, that's it.
So you're doing basically 4 to 6 of those cuts once it gets to the top. However many stems you have, that's how many you'll tip.
Yeah.
So after you've done your tipping, you'll start to see this happen, which is if you follow these lines of dragon fruit up, you can see we did a tip and they're just starting to branch. So each main one will start to branch off maybe 4, 5 times. That will then branch itself maybe 1 or 2 more times, and you'll start to get what looks to be kind of like a monster.
Yeah.
And that's really what you're looking for, because you want as many stem chunks as possible, right, Richard?
Yeah.
To then produce the fruit. And to get those fruit to produce, you could just wait, but there is a way to force it, and it's going back to that tipping. So what you'll notice on this variety here is a couple years ago, I cut the tips of all of these offshoots off. And what that does when you do it sort of late summer is it forces these new nodes not to produce more vegetation or more stems, but actually to produce those flower buds. And that's where the story of dragon fruit gets really interesting.
Once it hits flowering season, these are little things that you guys are going to want to pay attention to. These thorns here, they have two jobs. They can either put out new growth, or when it's flowering season, they put out flower buttons. And these will start to swell up, and the thorn will just fall off. And within 30 to 35 days, that flower button, believe it or not, is going to bloom into a gigantic flower. And then what's next?
Well, this is what you do that you taught me is because it's such a special flower, that flower blooms literally over 12 hours and that's it. And you have your window to pollinate it or enjoy it. And literally it is dead after that the very next morning.
Yep.
This is what Richard taught me. Let's just say it's February 1st right now and this has a little flower button. What I would do is I just write the date. So just 2/1/2024. I know that if it's March, 10th?
Yeah.
I know I'm close for when this flower starts to open. And so when we talk about the flowering process, a lot of folks watching probably lived through either your or my journeys, but for someone who hasn't seen it, talk us through that day.
So once a flower is ready to bloom, you're going to start to notice it right away. The bulb starts to kind of open its petals. And within, I would say, that usually happens in the afternoon, and within 3 to 4 hours, it will fully bloom. So I write down the dates, so then that way, when it gets close to that day, I expect it to open around 30 to 35 days. So when it gets closer to that last 4 to 5 days, I'm out there every day around when sun's about to fall down, about 3 p.m. You can totally tell when the flower is going to open. It's just going to starts
to creak open a little bit. You can see it peeking out. Yeah.
Like a Demogorgon opening its mouth. It's pretty crazy.
So that's the point where knowing your variety, like we mentioned in the beginning of this video, is so important, because if you're growing something, Richard, like a Vietnam white, which is the most classic dragon fruit variety, you could just sit back and enjoy. You don't have to do anything. And that's why we recommend it as a beginner dragon fruit, because it's going to open up and then it will pollinate itself. It has both of the female and male parts of the flower in it. You could jostle it a little bit if you want to, but you don't have to. Now, if you're growing something like sugar dragon, the other variety we mentioned, it can still pollinate itself, but you may just kind of want to shake it a little bit or take a little brush and kind of brush the parts together.
And then put it on there.
And make sure that it actually pollinates. And that's why we don't recommend growing a crazy variety that you actually have to have 2 dragon fruit and cross-pollinate. It's not a great beginner's thing, but trust me, once you get bitten by this bug, you'll be cross-pollinating in a few years' time. So Richard, after we've pollinated that night, we've enjoyed the beautiful flower.
Yeah.
How do we know that that flower has set a fruit behind it?
So this is the question
this is like the dilemma.
And it's tricky. So after you pollinate your dragon fruit, and if it's successful, within 4 to 5 days, you're going to see what looks like a dead flower, and you're going to think that it has failed. But no, the flower actually dies, because if it's successful, only the flower part will start to dry up and fall off. And if you look at the base of the flower, there's like a little ball that will slowly start to grow and form into a dragon fruit.
Right. And so then depending on the variety, it's probably another 35 to 70-ish days.
Correct.
Really depends.
Yeah.
So then what you'll do is come back. So let's say it was February 1st when the bud formed.
Yeah.
It's been 35 days. So it's March 5th now.
Yeah.
And so then you write 3/5. Right?
Yep, 3/5, the day that it opened and you pollinated your dragon fruit, you write that date down.
Now you know when it's going to get ripe, because depending on the variety, Vietnam white is 35 days.
35 days.
So really another way to think about it is the second you see that flower bud form, about 70 days, you're going to be enjoying a delicious dragon fruit. So after you have harvested, enjoyed your first dragon fruit, you're kind of just left with a plant like this.
Yes.
And you get into the winter time and you want to figure out, what am I supposed to do to keep this thing going? Clearly, and I'm very sorry, Richard, because this is your child. This is Sour Patch Kids, one of your varieties, and it doesn't look that good right now. So talk to me about why. I see some red dots here. I see some weird dots up there. What are some problems someone can run into?
And it's okay, Kevin. Don't blame yourself too hard on this. This also happens to the veterans and to me as well. And you got to just know how to attack it right when it does happen, right? So you're going to see your occasional cactus rust right here.
These little red dots.
Just little red, orange dots. And to me, this is not too concerning. It's not spreading. It's kind of localized, and you see that it kind of stopped where it's at already.
It hasn't like taken over the
whole branch. So something like this, copper fungicide, you can spray at it, stop the spreading. And if it's really an eyesore to you, you can completely take it right off.
Yeah, that one was a little bad, so we probably take that off. But then we got something different up here.
Yeah.
And I think that's a clue as to what it is. It's the highest point.
Yeah.
So what are we seeing right there?
So this is your sunburn. So here you can tell is because it gets kind of mushy. See, I kind of move it, and you don't mind if I break this, Kev?
Go for it.
Here we go. You see that? It's
Ew.
rotting inside. It's basically melted and cooked the flesh, and this is what's happened. It becomes mush, and you can just break it off easily. Ideally, you don't want to keep that. It's just gonna keep melting off until all of this cutting here becomes mush. So it's a good idea to just take it off. But this is a great sign of sunburn if you see something like this.
So either treat or remove sunburn or cactus rust. But at the same time, this is a couple years old. So let's say you've gone through a couple of these cycles, right? What am I supposed to do? Because this looks crazy right now.
Yeah. Once they're too kind of congested like this, it makes them harder to flower.
Yeah.
Then there's not enough sun penetration, right? So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna remove any cutting that is just too far out here. We wanna keep all of the long cuttings that's close to the center of the trellis, because once they get out here and they're kind of just everywhere,
Like these little nubs.
they don't really do nothing but kind of take room. So I'll just start cleaning up anything that's below 6 inches. So we got a good amount here.
Oh, wow. Yeah, all these little guys.
All these little guys
Okay.
can go.
So just kind of spin around this whole thing, like take this off,
Yeah,
right?
take that off here.
Am I trying to thin out some of the actual stems that are coming out of the main to like loosen this whole thing up, or?
Yes, if you see that remember when we talked about sub branches, we want to have at least 2 to 3 sub branches. If you see like 5 or 6 on that branch,
It's too many.
There's too many.
Yeah.
Just leave 2 or 3. So once you cut out all of the old ones, those new ones are going to get all of the hormones, and it's going to push growth and all of the energy there, producing quality buds and branches. That's just going to be overall way healthier.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of fruit tree pruning.
Yeah.
When you remove fruit from a stem, let's say you have 8 peaches on a stem.
Exactly.
You'll actually take half of those off early and get 4 amazing peaches.
Yes.
So it's kind of the same idea.
Same thing.
So let's go ahead and prune this down. So as you prune this up, you're basically just setting this up for that next cycle of growth where you would repeat everything we just showed you, except for that it's already at the top of the trellis. So next season, little fertilizer, little tipping maybe, and you're good to go, right?
Yeah, fertilizer, water, tipping, and then you're ready for a whole new season.
So that is the dragon fruit journey. Hopefully you begin it. It's one of the most rewarding things I've done in the garden, and I've done a lot of different stuff. Thanks to Richard for coming on. You can check his channel out, Grafting Dragon Fruit. Check our dragon fruit playlist out. Good luck in the garden, and keep on growing.